When we say the word wealth, we're not just talking about money, we're also talking about time, and we're talking about the influence in the lives of the people you care about the most. Wealthy people, those who have a lot of money, time, and influence, didn't get there by taking the same path as everyone else. They thought differently. They made bold, unusual moves, and that's why they've accomplished what so few people accomplish. The goal of this podcast is to train you in the mindsets and the specific tactics of the wealthy so that you're fit and capable of producing wealth yourself. We want to help you get WealthFit. Let's go. Welcome back. As you know, it's my job to get inside the heads of successful investors and entrepreneurs and find out the mindset and the specific actions they took to create that success. And today we are talking to the $250 million man, Geoff Chadwick. He is the Chief Marketing Officer at FortuneBuilders. And I say $250 million man because he has managed over $250 million in ad spend in his career so far, and that number keeps growing every day. And so in this episode, you're going to learn lessons from advertising, all of the experience that he has had in managing that large of an ad spend. You're going to learn some of the lessons that he picked up along the way. You'll also discover what and why you need to be a full stack marketer. That was a completely brand new term to me. And if you know what that means in the development world, or if you don't know, you're going to find out in the show. It's quite interesting. We also talk about the .com crash, the wild, wild west, and calling audibles in business and in life. In addition, we get into the power of being present for your family, for your business, for your team. We really talk about that, and I thought that was really interesting. You're going to hear that in this show as well. And finally, how to get more out of your team. And it's not what you're thinking. This show is jam-packed with greatness. I can't wait for you to hear it. With that said, let's get to it. It's the late 90s. You're young. You're in tech. Geoff, you're riding high. Valuations go nowhere but up in this time frame. And you've got stock options. It's like the Silicon Valley dream, but it doesn't go down like it goes down in the movies. Take us back to that wild, wild west time and what happened.
I remember exactly back then. I remember actually being at a party at barnesandnoble.com, and I was part of the software development team that actually worked on that website. And I remember when a lot of people at barnesandnoble.com, and they went public, and I remember looking out the door and looking at a lot of young people who were now becoming millionaires. And I was there as a consultant, and I was just sitting there kind of in the window. Everyone was celebrating. And it was just amazing to actually be there and witness it. And I was jealous. I was sitting there and I was jealous for a lot of the employees. I did a lot of consulting. I was doing Nabisco. I worked at barnesandnoble.com to launch that website. I actually did some consulting for Priceline when they were launching. And there was a time in my life where I remember just being a consultant and watching all these young entrepreneurs, young developers, right out of college, and they were making tons and tons of money. And there was a level where I was just jealous. And the consulting company that I worked for at the time, I don't know the exact number, but I was probably 40th hired at that consulting company. And I felt like I was missing out on a huge opportunity. Why was I not at one of these .coms? Why was I not part of these parties where everyone was becoming a millionaire? And what happened was, we grew that consulting company from probably 30 or 40 when I got there to over 500 consultants. And a company came in by the name of CMGI back in the day, and I got my opportunity. I got my opportunity where they came in and they bought our company for $1.2 billion. That's with a B. So going from consulting job to consulting job, and there was a lot of jealousy. I actually got my opportunity. I was excited. I mean, I was young. I was hungry. I was working my butt off. I mean, we were working probably from 8 in the morning to 11 at night, helping Barnes & Noble, helping Priceline. And I was just happy to get that opportunity. And like you mentioned, I mean, it was crazy, crazy time, Dustin. I mean, it was just insane the amount of money that these companies were pouring into software, pouring into their companies. And a lot of it wasn't their money. A lot of these companies at the time weren't even profitable. It was just money that was being spent.
You saw, because we chatted a little bit before this, you saw it not as a special time. You actually thought it was bubble. So it seems like you had this recognition that it was overinflated. Am I right about that?
I mean, I remember doing consulting for a company, and it was all VC money, and the CEO hired his wife to build out a call center and decorate the call center. I remember kind of sitting back and just looking at the cubicles, the chairs, the pictures on the wall. And I remember thinking, why are they spending so much money on a call center for a non-profitable company? I remember just the waste. I really do. I mean, and I don't know if that's just the frugal part of me, but I just remember people not taking care of investments and not taking care of the investors' money. And it was a gross time. I mean, they were just spending money left and right. And like you said, I'm a technical person. I remember being very analytical and not understanding, and I was young, not understanding how they're actually going to get a return on these investments.
I mean, that's pretty wise. Yeah, I think back to when I was young and you have leadership around you and you just kind of think like they know what to do with it. And I could see myself in your situation saying, well, this is just how it is. This is status quo. Is this just something that is inside of you to be mindful or to be frugal in all areas of your life? Or how did you recognize, or is this something that you picked up now looking back at the situation?
I don't know if it's ingrained in me. I feel there was a couple of consulting companies that I worked with that were constantly raising money. So it's not like they just had money and were spending it. It was, okay, we just built this huge call center, spent a lot of money, but wait, we're not opening the call center because we have to raise more money. And to me, it was just pretty clear. I don't think I had some special intuition. I think when the executive team is not working on the business, when they're not talking about sales, when they're not talking about marketing, and they're constantly only talking about the next round, that's what was a little strange to me.
That's interesting. Did you know it was a special time? I mean, obviously you saw all this valuation. Did you realize at this point in your life, did you have this feeling in the back of your head, this is going to go away someday? Or did you just always think this is how it is and it's going to be this way forever?
I didn't have at that time a mentor where I could bounce questions off. I mean, my mentor was my father. My father worked for the same company for 40 years. So a lot of the advice that I got back then was really just talking to my dad, right? And my father would always tell me, well, if you believe in the company, you believe in the leaders, you just kind of stick with that company, So I never really thought it would end. You know what I mean? It was a great ride. I mean, I was living in New York City. I was in a corporate apartment. I had a per diem. And at the time, I didn't have an apartment because I was never traveling back home. I was only working. I didn't need a car because I got a per diem for living in New York City. So it was an interesting ride where I didn't have anything that I owned and I didn't need it. So I just thought that was how it worked. I really just thought that was how it worked until after the purchase of our company, I started to see the decline quick. I did have stock options in the consulting company, and I remember week after week after week just losing money, and thinking to myself, and you got to stick with the company. You have to stick with the company. You don't sell your options, and there was a long period where you couldn't anyway. What you do is if you love your job, you love the leadership, and I love the leadership of our consulting company, you just stick it out. And I remember just pretty much going from the top all the way down to the bottom. And it didn't take long. It literally took 6 months to see that decline. In the company that actually purchased our consulting company, what they did was a lot of people were going to leave, including myself. They said, well, if you stay for a year, after this huge decline, you'll actually get a bonus for staying. So that's what they did to actually entice people not to walk away from the consulting company.
What was the impetus, or what was the thing that pushed you over the edge and you said, listen, this ship is gone, it's sunk? Like, what was that thing?
What it was I was on one consulting job for a long, long time. And at the end, and I really remember just them raising more money, and you just felt it. You know, there was a big call center there and it was half full, right? Mm-hmm. And they were constantly just talking about raising money. And at the time, that was the same time where I was a year after staying. So I was actually able to get a bonus to actually take that money and start something. And that's what I wanted to do. I think I was always kind of an entrepreneur and always wanted to own my own thing and grow my own thing. And I had the opportunity to do that after sticking that 1 year out.
All right, got it. So you got a little payday in it. I didn't know that. So the next thing, if I'm not mistaken, is you start a mortgage company, or is there a couple things along the way before you get to that?
No, I started a mortgage company right after that. And what was happening was a lot of my friends from high school and college were in sales, and a lot of them were doing really, really well. And they all kind of worked for the same consulting company. And my business partner at the time was managing that office. And he was frustrated because the owner was not engaged. He was actually working a lot of hours, and all my friends were in the office doing all the loans. So they said, hey, why don't you come? You just kind of got this payday. Mm-hmm. You could come, you could run all the technology and marketing, and all of our friends will move from that old mortgage company to us. So from day one, we started with almost 30 employees. Wow. I mean, they left that mortgage company and joined our mortgage company, and we were writing loans within the first 14 days. I mean, we were closing loans. So it was interesting. It was kind of like handed to me, where one of my friends who was running that mortgage company said, hey, why don't we partner up and start this? And not too much thought really went into it. I knew that I could still do technology. I could still do marketing and still do what I love, but yet have a lot more ownership of my future.
Did you have any fear? I mean, because you were going from, call it corporate America, essentially, now into the entrepreneurship world. So did you have any, walking into 30 people like that you're responsible for, that you have to lead them in a way. Did you recognize anything, or the consulting world taught you a lot?
The consulting company always teaches you a lot. I mean, a lot of people that are listening to this podcast, I think coming out of college, it's always good to do consulting. What consulting allows you to do is see different businesses, how they work, how they operate, how they make money, how they succeed, how they fail. It's the same thing with this podcast, Dustin, right? It's like you interview people from different walks of life. By listening to this podcast, you hear other people's stories, how they succeeded, how they failed. And the consulting industry gives you the same exact experience. So the question is when I was starting the mortgage company, my business partner was all sales, 100% sales, didn't know how to market, did not know anything about technology. So all of our conversations were about how bad the industry is, and meaning how you're communicating with mortgage brokers, how you're communicating with realtors, or how you're communicating with the banks, and how a lot of that stuff could be automated. So I felt like it was a place that I belonged because it was in an industry that was a lot of just pushing paper. So I was excited because I could build a portal for realtors to log into to say, okay, I've given this mortgage broker 10 loans. What's the status? Are they going to close on time? Are they not going to close? Can a realtor help facilitate getting paperwork? So I was excited just to do the tech and marketing side of the business. I mean, after running that company, I think we owned it for 6 years. I still really know nothing about mortgages, but I know a lot about how the marketing makes the phone rings. And I know a lot about the technology and how technology could help grow a loan officer from one level to the next level.
I definitely want to talk about tech and marketing, but when you were doing the consulting thing, it was mainly tech and coding, yeah?
Or 100%. It was all software development.
So where does marketing come in? Like, what made you get excited about marketing, being a techie?
I've always been interested in marketing, meaning even with a technology degree, you would sit in business meetings and it was all about marketing, meaning, okay, you're building this tech, but how is the end user going to interact with this tech? What's the psychology behind it? And a lot of tech people need to understand both sides. Or if you're in a startup and you allow just the developers to develop things without marketing elements in it, you're going to waste a lot of money. So because software developers by nature don't understand consumer behavior, they just don't. And where I see a lot of people fail is they invest in tech, but yet they're not hand-holding the developers of what needs to happen. Developers think it should happen one way. Business people, entrepreneurs think it should happen exactly the other way. And I always was intrigued by the integration of both of them. You know, even when I worked for the consulting company, I was very technical, but I was probably the most vocal developer there because of my communication skills, my ability to talk to the business owners and stuff like that. And so I've always sat in that middle ground. We had very, very technical people, very technical programmers. I'd give myself like a C at that, but I was like an A at the ability to communicate with the business and then even help communicate back to the developers. So the consulting company I worked at, they were very, very technical where I was intimidated the whole time. I remember the first day on the job, I tell this story, and it's an interesting lesson. I showed up to the job, and they give you a project to work on. And at the time, we were coding this language Java. And I've never programmed Java. And I was there, and I got caught up where I was coding, and I really couldn't get it to work. And everybody else that started the same week as me, they're all home. I mean, these guys could code. And I'm the only one really left behind. And I had no clue what I was doing. And they left me in this kind of training center. And there was all these Java books and stuff like that. And I remember staying there the whole night. And I still couldn't figure out how to fix the problem. And this Russian guy, and you have to remember this is a consulting company. Most of the people are not in the office. They were always sent out to clients. But there was like this one Russian guy that I still keep in contact with. And I asked him a question, and he picked up a Java book and threw it at me. And he said, if I tell you the answer, you're never, ever going to remember it. But I know the answer to your problem is in this book. And it was funny because he was the most technical person. They really never sent him out to clients. They always kept him in the office to kind of help with the tech and the infrastructure and that kind of stuff.
Well, that's interesting. Do you manage that way?
There's an element, not rough like that, but There is a management style that I love where you have to allow your teams to make decisions and fail on their own, right? And then being able to debrief after the failure. I think that's really, really important. If you're a manager and you're always making decisions for your employees, you're training them to not be decision makers. And if you want to become an entrepreneur, that is really, really important, or you're going to be an entrepreneur of one for the rest of your life. You know, you have to come to the realization that not everyone will do it exactly the way you do it, but allow your teams to fail, the people that work for you to fail. I think that's truly, truly, really important because then what happens is when they fail, this is when your management skills come into place. That's you saying, okay, this failed. Great. Not a big deal. No skin off our back. Let's debrief and break down why it failed and what are the learning lessons from the failure. If you stopped that failure and you told them this is how it should be done and they implemented it the right way and you didn't allow them to fail, the next time it was time for them to make a decision, they will not make a decision. You will train them to only allow you to make decision, and then you'll always just be an entrepreneur of one, and you will limit the growth of where you could go and the growth of your company.
I definitely want to spend some time there. And I want people to get a little bit more sense, like you've been through your share of adversity here. And we're talking about the mortgage company. You have a 7-year run roughly,
Yep.
Right around then. And then one day, I mean, I think this is crazy. One day, you've got loans to close, and this is not just one loan, but you've got multiple deals running, big office. And you get word back, I think it's from your partner, or you just get word back that, like, listen, the banks aren't sending the money. Like, everything else is up to close. Everything's normal like it normally is. The process, you got everything, you optimized it, and the banks aren't funding the accounts. They're not sending the money in.
Yep. There's a term in the mortgage industry called cleared to close, which means that money is going to be wired. And I remember that specific day where our customers are calling the office. They're at the closing tables. They're there. They're ready to start their dream. First time homeowners or a refinance, and they're sitting. We're in the state of Connecticut, so they're sitting there with their attorneys, and wires were not moving. And our phones were ringing, and when you're the broker of it, it's not the bank's fault. It's your fault. Right? So you're sitting there answering these phones. And I remember that specific day. I mean, we had multiple closings, and it was like a gridlock. I mean, the banks were not transferring money at the time. And I remember it. I mean, we had one of the things that we used to do was we would pay for the appraisal of the homeowner to make it, because that was like a boom of the mortgage industry. So what would happen, we would say, hey, come to us, we'll do your close, and it's no cost out of pocket. So we would fork over the money ahead of time for the appraisal just so people didn't have to pay for it up front. And I remember that all the loans that we got cleared to close that were in the process, the programs that they were qualified for were no longer existent. All the banks went from really, really loose programs, very strict right away. So we had all these loans, thousands of loans in the process where we forked over $300, $400, $500 for the appraisal. And now it's hard to say, hey, Dustin, we'll pay for your appraisal, $500. We got you your loan. Great. And then have to call you back and say, sorry, there's no loan for you, but there's $500 that's owed. You're not paying that money. Yeah. So not only did there was a strong restriction on the programs, but we also had a lot of money that we had that we're on the hook for because we prepaid for all these appraisals. Man, this is like the canary in the coal mine. So we're talking 2007, 2008, right? Big crash. So like, how in the heck do you, like, I can't imagine taking those calls and explaining, like, listen, we got to start all over again. If you can even do that for some of these people. What was that like? I mean, it was definitely stressful. It was really stressful. And myself and my business partner, we're going through a tough time there. He was going through a divorce. At the time, we had, just like a lot of businesses, lines of credit. We, at the top of our game, we actually got a beautiful office. So we had a long-term lease. So you have a divorce going on. You have this new office with a long-term lease, but yet we felt the pressure of the products that we could offer decrease and our liability increase. And I mean, it was 100% stressful. I'd be lying to say I wasn't stressed. One of the biggest lessons that I learned was if you have a business partner and you guys sign a personal guarantee, you have to remember, let's say me and Dustin are 50-50 partners and we sign a personal guarantee on the LLC. Dustin files bankruptcy, which happened to me. My partner filed bankruptcy. They don't look at the personal guarantees as the way that the entity is structured. They don't say, oh, Dustin owns 50%, Geoff owes 50%. If one party files bankruptcy, which happened to me, 100% of the debt gets thrown on you, and I remember that. I remember all this debt and me doing the math and saying, I have my half. I'm going to be okay. Right. But when you do that calculation and a life event like a divorce or a bankruptcy happens, double that money very quick. So you have to always kind of know how, not only do you have partners, but how are the guarantees work? Because if you don't understand that personal guarantees aren't 50-50, that they become 100% if one of the partners back out, you have to make sure that you're ready for that experience being an entrepreneur. All right. So I know there's more to this. So what the heck happens when your partner files bankruptcy? I'm not talking like legal, Geoff, but like the impact on your business, the impact on this. Like, talk to us a little bit about how did you get through that? Because I can't imagine that's easy. Yeah, it's not easy. So obviously the first thing I did was went to an attorney and he kind of looked at all the assets that I had, and I had money. I'm not saying that I was broke at all. I had money for 50% of it. And I actually went to an attorney and with my business partner, and we sat there through all of our assets and liabilities, and he looked at me and says, hey, you should file bankruptcy.
He told you that?
He told me that. And I remember this, and I sat in that attorney's office, and we filled out the bankruptcy papers. I remember sitting there filling out bankruptcy papers. And at the end of the meeting, I was like, I still can't believe that I'm getting this advice to file bankruptcy, even though I have a couple $100,000 in the bank.
Yeah.
You know, it was crazy.
Yeah.
So I remember at the time going home and talking to my wife, and she says, why don't you just spend all that money on a good attorney? It's like, file bankruptcy if you're broke. Why are we filing bankruptcy? Find the best attorney to help negotiate all this debt for you. So I ended up not filing bankruptcy, taking the money I had, knowing, hey, I could spend all my money on a good attorney to help negotiate myself out of this. That was an interesting experience. And I was able to get out of the situation for less than half. Literally, when you remember the whole bubble explosion. I mean, I got a really good attorney, and he was able to negotiate out of all this debt and actually allow me still to have funds to move on to my next adventure.
You went through like a crazy ride through this. How did it unravel? Like, how did you leave the mortgage business? How did it come to a close?
It came to a close. It was a stressful time of my life, right? I remember my wife calling me. My wife said, hey, there's a marshal at our house and is going to put a lien on our property. And I mean, I was taken back, and I remember going home that day feeling like an absolute failure. I remember being really emotional, not being able to keep it together. And I remember walking into the house and looking at my wife and apologizing. I remember feeling like a failed entrepreneur, a failed business person. She had to accept these papers. And I remember my wife looking at me, and I don't think everyone would have this experience, but this is my experience. I remember my wife looking at me saying, they could take our house, they could take our cars, they could take our boat. And the worst thing that could happen is we would move in with my mom and dad, and we'd probably have a nice steak dinner tonight. Like, what are you worried about? What are you crying about? And I remember like kind of that easing me. I had so much guilt of failing my family, but to realize that it was all self-induced, that my wife wasn't worried and my wife knew, listen, like, we're okay.
Yeah.
And as an entrepreneur, I think sometimes we get in our own heads about what bad is and what really is bad. It's like if we lose everything, who do we have? We have friends, right? We have family. We have people that care about us, that sometimes you have to suck it up and ask for help, but it puts things in perspective. My wife put my worries in a reality check. It wasn't, we're not eating dinner. It wasn't, our kids won't have clothes. It was, hey, not a big deal. My parents will take us in. I remember being upset and being emotional with my father. My father's like, not a big deal. Move in with us. To them, it was like black and white. It's like, this is our family. We'll take care of you. Like, stop your worrying. Like, your health is more important. The stress is not worth it. Like, just take a step back, breathe, like really just count your blessings is what my wife said.
I think she's incredible. Man, yeah, I'm definitely moved by that because obviously behind, whether you're the leader of the household, but the saying is, behind every great man and an equally, if not more powerful woman. And so to have her in your corner, I mean, that's incredibly powerful, any partner, man or woman. And so where do you think that came from? Like, did she grow up around entrepreneurship? Did she just recognize in the moment this wasn't going to help? Because I could see other people's spouses getting in fear, right? Like, yep. Oh my gosh, like we got to start over. Where are we going to get them? Like you hear the mind trap, the chatter going on in people's heads because fear is driving it. How do you think they were able to detach, or she was able to detach from the situation?
My wife and her family are absolutely amazing. Their vacations are jumping in a motorhome, going to a national park where there's no cell phone service. where there's no connection to the outside world. And it's really all about being present and spending time with the ones you love. And my wife still has that today. I mean, our goals is to see every national park. What I think happened with my wife was it stopped being about the things that surround us. Is all about the people that we're with. My wife's family, they still play board games and they love it. And I love it too. And I think that her family, they weren't rich, but what they were was they were very, very present. Present with their kids, present with their relationships, and they were very in tune with one another. And I think that's where my wife gets it from. She's very in tune with me, the stress that I put on myself, the stress that I bring into the household. And she has the ability to say, this is not worth it. Even today, she'd be like, hey, you're super stressed. Like, don't do this. Like, what we have, what we built now, and we've been able to rebuild it again. You know, I've been able to rebuild it. If you look at my story, it's like I went really up on the tech side, and then I saw the crash of the tech side. Then I had this great rise on the mortgage side, and then I had a crash on the mortgage side. And I've been able to, with my marketing skills, with my technology skills, build us back up, right? And we're at the top, and I feel like I'm at the top. And my wife's still very present to the point, like the house that we have, we don't need this house. We don't need a nice vacation. We could still be present and travel in a motorhome to national parks. I mean, we talk about our bucket list. My wife says her bucket list is to take the kids out of school for 1 year, get in an RV and travel. It has nothing to do with being at a nice resort. It has nothing to do with, and those things are nice and they're lovely. And believe me, I enjoy them as much as the next person. But we have the ability to kind of pull back and have a reality check of who we are and what's the most important, which is being together and our children.
I know you talk to a lot of entrepreneurs. I'm just curious because I have this with Missy, my wife, and she knew, like I should have left before, my previous thing. She knew many years. It sounds like your wife has that ability. Do you think that's the case for a lot of people? And is it because we're hard-headed? Or, I mean, what's your whole take on this? Spouses sort of knowing before we know.
I think we, as entrepreneurs, we don't want to give up.
Yeah.
Failure's not an option. And I think sometimes we take that too seriously. I watch Shark Tank. I don't know if you watch Shark Tank, Dustin. Mr. Wonderful says, put a time frame on this. You know what I mean? And they do it a lot. Like, I'm going to give you this money to be successful, but put a time frame. I think it's really important to know your goals, understand your goals, but put a time frame on it. How much are you willing to lose? How much are you willing to risk? How much are you willing to sacrifice for it? But understand that maybe there should be a time frame on that. And for me, I always take a step back and try to always measure my happiness. Everyone that listens to this podcast, no matter who you are, you have skills. Whatever that skill is, you have skills. But make sure you're happy with what you're doing. That's usually the indicator that you need to move on, is if you're just not happy. It's not worth it.
Hey, I want you to take a second and go to wealthfit.com/go right now. I'm going to do it too. You with me? Once you're there, click the big pink button that says Get Started Now. When you do that, you're going to get a free online video course called WealthFit Building 101, how to get out of debt, boost your active income, and start investing for passive income. It's taught by my good friend and WealthFit founder, Andy Proper, and it's a really inspiring, life-changing course that's going to arm you with little mindset shifts and specific action steps you can take to experience your financial breakthrough and get well on your way to building real, lasting wealth for yourself and your family. Don't miss this. Thousands and thousands of people have already joined the WealthFit movement, completed the free course, and are breathing fresh air financially, maybe for the first time in their lives. We're waiting on you. So go to wealthfit.com/go right now to join us and claim your free life-changing courses online. Back to the show.
Stress you put on your body, the stress you put on yourself, it's definitely not worth it.
100%. I think that's the biggest thing I learned in my previous thing was I was there too long and didn't check in. So that time frame, I think, is incredibly great advice. I'm a happy-go-lucky guy. I like to think, like, looking back over the rough patches in my life, I got rose-tinted glasses, but I was privy to a conversation that you had, and your partner essentially giving you 50%, 100% of the burden, right, from the personal guarantees in the mortgage company. I imagine that was a pretty sticky situation. Probably at the time that it happened, you may have had a different mindset, but I almost get the sense like it's your moral obligation in your head. It's your duty to check in with him. So you still talk to him. And we've seen business partnerships fall apart and things like that, and people will never talk to them again. And so why is it so that you're in his life when the situation might not have been so pleasurable at the end?
Yeah, I think my business partner filled a gap where my self-confidence failed. And I feel like a lot of people get business partners to fill the void of what they think they're missing in their life. And I understood marketing and technology. My business partner knew sales. That organization that we ran, if I, coming out of doing consulting, was a solo entrepreneur running that company, it would have failed. And it would have failed very quickly. I was not the motivational guy. I was not the sales guy. I was analytical brain that knew marketing. And that was what I was. And when we joined forces, he was the driving force of that company. I was a very good number two. So if you look fast forward, what happened, I remember after my business partner filed bankruptcy, there was a gap in him also, as far as a gap in self-awareness, right? And we were friends prior to that. So what he did for me, I left that company, I hate to say it, but more confident that I went into it because I was able to grow it and I was able to build it. Yes, it didn't end well, but I sharpened the saw, I sharpened my chops, and he gave me skills that I never had going into that company. And then what happened, I remember when we forked ways, I went my way because I loved marketing, I loved technology, and I was able to step into something and do my passion again very quickly. But I remember seeing self-doubt kind of resonating in with him. And I remember thinking to myself, like, it's my obligation to help fill that void that he filled in me. Businesses break apart. Business is business. Money is money. But the truth of the matter is we're all human, right? And during that whole process, I don't think anything was done intentionally. I don't. I truly don't believe it. I believe that decisions had to be made that were tough decisions for him, where he was going through divorce, the business. It was all timing. I don't believe that there was a ill harm where he looked and said, I'm going to screw this guy. That in my brain never happened, right? So we made the decision to shut the company down, but he's a very, very good salesperson. I'm a very good sales and marketing, but once in a while, we all lose our way. And to have a conversation with somebody once a year or once every 6 months and say, listen, you should always be making money. You have this skill set. You have this to offer. Sometimes people need to hear that, and they need to hear it from other people. And I feel like that was the void that I helped fill. Is as entrepreneurs, we all fail. And then when the self-doubt goes in, it's always good. It's hard once in a while to go from self-doubt to building internal self-doubt and building yourself back up. What I would ask anyone that listens to this is if you have friends or family members that are having self-doubt, you need to understand what's the most powerful thing that they have to offer. Reiterate that with them. Tell them how good they are with that, because that goes a long way. You don't need to become business partners with them again, but I think to have conversations with people to reinforce how good they are, I think it just all comes back to you.
You know, it's funny. I wrote self-aware like maybe 5 seconds before you said the word. So my question is, do you feel you're self-aware? Like you have a pretty good sense of that?
I do. I feel like I'm blessed now to work at Fortune Builders and with leaders that are straight to the jugular. Meaning, if you are not doing something, we've created an environment of being self-aware and understanding where you stand. I know my skill set. I'm not the most motivational guy, like I said. I'm not the rah-rah guy, but what I am is I'm very organized and I allow my team to make decisions, allow my team to fail, and try to have these learning experiences with them.
It's funny, you perfect lead into this. So you're at the mortgage company, and I always say the boys, which you're part of the boys when I say it, the boys at FortuneBuilders, the leaders, the executive team and owners. And so you met the boys at the mortgage company. You did some loans for them. You were helping them in their biz essentially, or helping them do deals. When it came time to shift or pivot out of it, what attracted you specifically to want to get behind this venture, to want to get behind FortuneBuilders?
So when we closed down the consulting company, I was going to start going crowdsourcing, meaning software as kind of like a service where you could crowdsource technology. I was very, very interested in that. So I was either going to go the software development way, or then Than called me and was just like, hey, let's go out to lunch. What attracted me to them the most was when I was running my mortgage company, Than, Paul, Conrad, JD, they would always show up to the mortgage company and they would walk the floor and they would ask a lot of questions. They didn't walk into any situation without trying to get something good out of it. So they would walk in and say, oh, how are these phones ringing? Who's making the phones ring? What direct mail piece are you using to make these phones ring? Oh, you're running ads online. What type of ads? How much are you spending? To the point where we spent a lot of money with our graphic designer to actually get folders printed up. Hey, do you have that Illustrator file of that printed out so we could kind of just throw our logo on it? Who is that graphic designer? Can you do an introduction to it? So the curiosity is huge. And that's what attracted me to them. And the other thing that attracted me to working with that team was their level of wanting to educate and being able to learn from others, people more successful than them, investing in themselves. I loved that element of that. And that's where I got a love for. And when I started with FortuneBuilders, we were very, very small. I mean, it's close to 11 years now. And we were very small, but I had a lot of this guilt from hiring my friends and then ultimately having to let go of my friends. Mm-hmm. And I was living in the Northeast. Then Paul, Conrad were up in the Northeast. But there was a lot of guilt and responsibility that I felt that I let these people down. Not only that my friends, but their family, their kids. And there was a lot of guilt there. And just their passion, their excitement, them wanting to learn and saying, you could come work for us, but you're not going to know everything. Find out who does it better than you and have that humility to identify that and make an investment to get your skill set up to the next level of the people that actually do it better than you.
All right. So you're the holdout, right? So they moved to San Diego. You're in Connecticut. Everyone essentially moves from FortuneBuilders. Most people move. Yep. You're the holdout. What pushed you over the edge to move the fam? Did you feel that guilt of being in the same town with maybe people that you had to lay off or friends and family? Did you feel like you needed a fresh start? Like, what prompts you to go cross country?
This story is kind of interesting. It was a risk reward kind of thing for me. When we were in Connecticut, my wife at the time was a teacher, and she worked for a district where if you're a mom and you had a baby, they would keep your job the year you had the baby and the following year. You didn't get paid, but they kept your position. So what that allowed us to do is when we found out my wife was pregnant with our third, I said, hey, why don't we take this year and a half, pick up and move to California? And if we don't like it there, if we didn't like working, you didn't like the community, if you didn't like the area, we could always move back and you'd have your job. So you have to remember my story, right? I had that big .com rise and it fell. Then I had the mortgage company rise and fall. I measure risk in everything I do. And unfortunately, it's ingrained in me based on my story. So to be able to move from Connecticut out to California, knowing that we still had that anchor in the sand for my wife if things didn't work out, it was amazing. So listen, it wasn't the story that you're looking for, Dustin, where I just said, let's go, let's pack up the car, let's pack up the kids and go.
Yeah.
I was measuring the risk. And I do that a lot of times in my life now. I might not retire the richest guy in the world, but what I do is I always measure risk and reward because of that journey that I've been on, the journey that I shared, the up and downs. When I make money, I hold it a lot closer to me than I used to previously. And it's just, I have to let go of that a little bit now. It's harder. You're looking at the returns you get compared to other people. Mine are at the time sometimes half. So it's like I have to start jogging a little bit more and running a little bit more because of the experience that I had. And there's a lot of people that are probably listening now that had journeys like that are just scared to get back in the game because they had a huge rise, they had a fall, and they're rising again. And sometimes it just it blurs your vision of what you should be doing as an entrepreneur because of your history. We all have a history, and sometimes it's a great asset that I've built. I've strengthened my muscle over time, but sometimes it gets in the way too.
Yeah. I wasn't necessarily looking for a story, but I think the big takeaway for me was I found through life I've taken a lot of risks, especially earlier on when I didn't have a family. And the anchor comment that you said about telling your wife, and I could have done that with Missy because she definitely thrives and wants that security. And so, and even moving out here is a big thing for us. And so the anchor in the sand thing really communicated to me, it's not just about me and how do I get my wife that sense of security because maybe I'm a little bit more of a risk taker. And so I think that's a big takeaway for people listening in is like, maybe you're the young gun, you can do risk like we did back in the day where we didn't have family. And so I'm curious as well, do you think you're taking less risk now because you've got family, you've got dependents, you've got people, or I should say not less risk, but how has that changed? How has your mindset changed?
It has changed, right? I have 3 children. So a lot of my mindset is about making sure that they're secure, right? And I always ask myself, the decisions I make, how is this going to impact my family? When I ended the mortgage company, my wife was pregnant with our first, right? So a lot of the decisions now are, how is that going to impact my children, their education? And then ultimately, how's that going to impact my health and my ability to be a good father? I could take more risk, 100%, but does that increase my stress level and my ability to be present with my kids? And sometimes you just kind of have that, you have to measure that kind of stuff. We only live once, right? And having that experience with your kids, it's like when I'm looking at investments, it's what's going to will this investment allow me to spend more time with my kids? Will this investment allow me to spend more time with my family? So I think that's kind of how I measure it now. It's interesting being associated with some of the top real estate investors in the country because I went through that whole .com boom and I never made an investment in passive income. I had the funds to do it.
Yeah.
Never had the intelligence or a mentor to educate me on that, right?
Yeah.
And I went down and then I had the mortgage company and I was around real estate all the time.
Yeah.
But it was about serving others. It wasn't about serving myself. And I ended that without having passive income to actually put me in a better spot, right? And it's just interesting of who you surround yourself with and how you think about money, and now that I have kids and I'm around some of the top investors in the country, it's great because now I'm thinking, okay, I've made this money. How does that money perform for me? We all have personal goals, but barely anyone has goals for the money that they have. And I'm at the point in my life where I have personal goals, but I also have goals for the money that I have and how is it going to perform? To be able to take a look at that and say, okay, did I hit my personal goals? Yes. But did I hit the goals for my money? People don't look at their money and having goals for their money. That's more important than having goals for yourself sometimes. Based on where you are in your life, if you have $500, what's that $500 going to make you at the end of the year? If you have 100,000, how is that going to perform? As an entrepreneur, we always try to put our employees out to work. But as an entrepreneur, you need to think about the money that you have, put that out to work. When you should be dedicating time every single week to manage that. We hand over our money to investment advisors or people to help us with our money, but how much time are you actually dedicating to that return? So not only should you have personal goals, you should have goals for the investments you currently have.
Geoff, that's why I'm fired up. I mean, that's my main mission here at WealthFit and the show is that I thought I was going to have that big Silicon Valley payday at the previous thing. Never happened. I didn't place nearly enough investments. I invested a little bit, but I wasn't thinking, like you said, goals for my money. It was like, I'm going to get that magical payday one day, and then I'll figure out like how to manage money and place investments out there when I have a big cash. And it doesn't always happen. And the odds are really against a lot of entrepreneurs. And so, I mean, obviously this is my passion, and that's why we're fired up here at WealthFit. I want to get us into marketing. You've done $250 million in ad spend management. I'm very curious, from when you started, you said 11 years, and then obviously before then, how has the landscape changed? You know, like you got offline back in the day, right? Direct mail and all that. In the bigger sense, how has advertising, how you place your money, how you think about getting a return on that, how has that changed in your time?
Yeah, I think it's a lot more targeted, meaning if I look back of all the marketing I did when I was doing consulting or with my mortgage company versus where it is now, I mean, a lot of the marketing back in the day was you throw a fishnet out and you try to see who you could pull up in your fishnet. Mm-hmm. And that is, you think about the mortgage company, I mean, we were sending direct mails, millions of direct mails a month, right? And you do like billboards, and it was so like just throwing that net and seeing who you could pick up, right?
Spray and pray, right?
Exactly. But now it's very targeted. As far as who you could target is very, very granular. And I think that's where marketing is, as far as understanding who is buying your product, who is buying your service, and being able to create audiences that look exactly like your ideal customer. And I think that's where it's changed. And also the way that we browse now, cross-platform, like there was no cross-platform 11 years ago, meaning if you're on your phone, now you're on your computer, how do you move advertising from one device over to another? I mean, it's the whole landscape has changed. I mean, it's totally, totally different now. And I'm more passionate than I've ever been because the integration between technology and marketing has never been greater. I mean, it really hasn't. If you don't understand technology, it's hard to be a marketer. If you don't understand how a pixel work or retargeting works or how to really go down to an IP address to look at somebody, I mean, it is all technology now, you know. And I was at a seminar and they put this analogy up on the screen and I thought it was beautiful, is if you want to become a marketer, you have to be what they call a full stack marketer. What does that mean? That means you need to know graphic design, how humans work, how graphic design work. And then on top of it, you have to understand the technology behind it. You need to understand how to outsource and get what you need done by a software developer and how to talk to a software developer as a marketer. You need to understand the technology of how that works, from pixels to retargeting to online to offline marketing. You need to be full stack. It's not like, hey, I'm a marketer, let's run an ad now and see if it works. I mean, you will get crushed. It's just totally, totally different and much more advanced now.
Geoff, you're fired up. I love it. I remember when I had my hand in marketing doing it, I remember at points being overwhelmed because there's so many different channels. You don't seem overwhelmed. You seem fired up. I mean, how is it? Because there's a new media every day, AR, VR is coming out. Like, how do you get so fired up when we just keep getting more things to manage?
Let me tell you, the more things to manage, the better you become as a marketer. And I'm going to tell you why, is people don't hang out anymore in one spot. What does that mean? That means if you call in from a radio ad, there's a good chance you're going to be on Facebook later in the day, right? There might be a chance you're going to be on Instagram. There's a chance you're going to be on Snapchat. And as a marketer, the more you could go cross platforms, the more that you could have multiple touch points, the better off you're going to be. If you're a one-sided marketer, hey, I'm a Facebook marketer, great. But the truth of the matter is you will lose to the people that understand multiple touch, attribution, across platform. Most people don't respond to advertising when they only see it once.
Yeah.
They just don't. What happens is that repetition, that multiple touches, is really what gets you to the point of decision making from trying to convert a lead over to an actual buyer or a customer. So you could talk about multiple channels and all these new platforms launching, but the more that launch, the more opportunity you have to touch your customers more than once. So the wider that the network gets, the better you are as a marketer because you could actually target the people no matter where they go.
It's interesting. I hadn't considered that. I'm curious, how do you, I don't want to say take down, but how do you vet a new channel? So like Snapchat, it's in my head, maybe even VR or AR, right? Like this stuff is coming and maybe VR, ARs, we're just a little bit a ways from that. But like, how do you look at a media and say, we're going to place our dollars here?
Yeah, I mean,
a new one.
I do direct response marketing, which means I need to get a return on my investment, meaning I'm spending money. How do I get a return? So it's very clear in black and white for the marketing I do. I don't do branding. I'm not working with Coke or Pepsi where I'm putting up billboards and I really don't know the return on investment. For me, it's really tracking the touch points, being able to track the return on investment. So if you go to Facebook and then you go to Instagram, then you go to Snapchat, and that's a new channel. And then from that point, you sign up. How do you making sure that you track those touch points, being able to track where you're coming from and trying to get a return on that investment? Not every channel you could get a return on investment. For example, a great example, Pandora. Pandora, 5 years ago, you could get a return on investment very quick. Their cost for 1,000 views was very low. They've almost doubled it, which means as a marketer, you're just cut in half. I mean, it's hard. So you have to know all your channels, what they're charging you to get your advertising out there. And then the most important thing, and this is where my tech side comes in, is the tracking of it. If you're advertising on multiple channels, you have to make sure that you're tracking where the leads are coming from. What is that ROI down to that channel? Because then you could see what audiences are you throttling up, which ones are you throttling down, and that's kind of how you tune it up. It's interesting. This is something that I always talk about is if you're talking to a media buyer, right, and they're asking you about if their goal is to get you cheap leads, that's really not the goal, right? The goal is to get you profitable leads. So if I was to ask your listeners, what would you rather have for your business, a lead at $1 or a lead at $5? And people are answering, hey, I want a lead for $1. That's not the right answer. 5's not the right answer. 2, it's which one returns the money. I could give you 1 million leads at $1, but if they only return 75 cents, I have bad news for you. You're going out of business, right? But if you're getting leads at $5 and they're returning $25, okay, now we have something that we could throttle up. So it has nothing to do with the leads. It really has to do with what's the investment on that lead and on that marketing channel. And that's where that term full stack marketer comes into place, is the ability to track that. I think that's really, really important.
Geoff, why don't you get your crystal ball out? What are you thinking about VR, AR? Are we too far away? Is it too cost prohibitive for you to be looking at as a viability? Where's your head at with that?
Yeah, I was actually at the Facebook conference F8, which is kind of an invite-only conference that I went to. We've played with Oculus. We've played with a lot of VR stuff. It really is early. And as far as for us to get a return on that investment at this time, but it depends on what niche you're in, right? If you're in a niche that's game related, there is a huge opportunity, meaning inside of Oculus, they have their own apps and stuff like that. You could play VR games and stuff like that. To be honest with you, for me specifically, right now is not the time, but you should play with that technology, understand that technology. When I was at F8, it's crazy. You know, you put on these goggles and your brain doesn't know the difference sometimes between VR and reality, right? And it gives you the ability to train, right? You might not have ever changed a tire on a car. You could go into VR and practice, right? If you're a doctor and you've never done surgery, but you've potentially stood behind somebody at surgery, that's not practice. You know, that's just watching. So what VR, I believe, will give people the ability to do is have real life scenarios of being able to get experience, right? And that's the same thing with paper trading accounts on stock, right? That's why they created paper trading accounts. So you could actually go in there, practice, get experience before you put a dollar at risk. It's the same thing with VR. You have to think of that as your training ground to be able to kind of strengthen the muscle before you actually put something at risk or be able to actually do something. So as of right now, for that channel, I don't see a ROI on that channel, but that doesn't mean that there's not a lot of niches where they could actually invest in VR and get a return on it.
Makes sense. Geoff, I want to return back to management because that's a big thing I've learned from you, and I think you have a lot of wisdom to share there. So you got a rather sizable team. How many folks?
I have direct reports to me. Direct reports are close to 11. That probably funnels down to 150, 200 people, but I have some PR team, right? Does a lot of article writing, SEO, and then my goal there is to try to get a return on investment. A lot of people don't get a return on investment on organic. I have customer service that works for me. I have call centers that report to me where we have hundreds of seats. I don't include that in the number. They're outsourced call centers. Software development, I have the CIO actually reporting to me, so I could still work on my chops in that. And then I have a lot of direct response people from copywriters to funnels to sales teams that I probably wouldn't have had if it wasn't for my old business partner, right? I have teams that are under me that actually do sales because of being able to sharpen that saw through my experiences along the way. So 11 direct reports, but it kind of filters down.
Let's talk PR team real quick. Is it one of the newest teams for you? Or no?
No, it's been a team for a long time for me. Trying to get a return on that investment is kind of newer and kind of the way that we're looking at it as far as writing articles, tracking those articles, tracking the lifetime value of those articles.
I'm curious, when you decide, and I guess you have to think back a little bit, but when you decide a team's going to report to you, not report to you, but really when you decide to create a new team, how much time do you give them before there's KPIs in place? Or are you coming out of the gate knowing I'm building this team with this specific purpose and here are the top 3 KPIs I need to know, and then we'll develop more later?
That's me. I always go into situations with KPIs. It's like if somebody wants to hire somebody on my team, it's like, okay, what's the return on investment of that person? I've put key performance indicators on everyone. I do. I think that's a great benchmark. And it also gives teams the ability to thrive for something. Meaning, if you have 5, 6 writers and whatever that is, let's say it's $500,000 in salaries, what's the return on that investment? Meaning, how much traffic are they getting to the website? How many people are opting in? What's the cost per acquisition? What's the lifetime value of those leads? I think people tend to be happier when they know they're having an impact. I mean, if you have team members that are just key they're role players, but they don't understand the piece of the bigger puzzle of how they're impacting it. If you have a customer service rep, their position is so important as my position. Why? Because they talk to more customers. Right. Meaning if they don't have, every customer doesn't have a great experience, and with today's landscape, if they leave a review about a bad experience, they could have more good for the company and harm for the company. So no matter who you are, no matter what role people play, they need to understand how that role rolls up to the top, the position that they're in, the impact on the bottom line. And then also they should know how their performance is measured too, because then they have something to thrive for. They could walk in the office and say, I want to do this because I want to move this needle. If there's no needle to move, people, what do? They start thinking about, okay, where can I go to help somebody else move a needle, right? And that's kind of how you make your team members happy, is giving them the ability to move the needle and have ownership of that.
Geoff, you got a lot of rock stars on your team, yourself included. How do you keep them? What's the key to keeping people around that bring massive value? And
I think the key is pulling different team members together with other skill sets and allowing them to learn more skills. Why do people leave companies? When you're interviewing people, why are you leaving? Oh, I'm in a stagnant position, right? There's not a growth. Just the point I'm trying to make is allow people to grow, invest in your people, allow them to go to seminars, to get taught, to pick up courses on pick up a course on WealthFit. Let them sharpen their saw. And then remember that you have other assets on your team. Meaning if you have a writer on a PR team, okay, well, you also have teams that are sales at the organization. Have them teach. One of the things is a lot of times you'll learn more when you have to teach it. So I allow my team members to teach other team members so they always feel like they're growing. I take it very personal to make sure that I leave people better than when I got them. People won't work for me forever. I understand that. Yeah. But the only thing I hope is that when they're done with me, that they're moving up, that they're actually going to be an entrepreneur, or they're going to have the skill set where they can provide for their family or their kids forever. I think that, to me, that's really, really important, is making sure that I always, always, always allow them to learn, allow them to fail, and ultimately the ability to make their own decisions. You know, I think you could really throttle your team or throttle down your team by training them that you're the only one that makes decisions. Allow them to fail, allow them to grow, and make sure that you collaborate across multiple team members, because everyone on your team has value and can teach somebody something.
You know, I've been privy to some of the meetings, and so I think your team has a lot of flexibility. I enjoy it. And I'm curious, though, when life is not humming along here, how do you know when to stiffen discipline? Is it really KPI driven? If the numbers are just down, do you rein them in? Do you change your style? If you're feeling stressed, do you enroll the team? Like, how do you manage through the downs?
Yeah. One of the things when there are downs, and there's downs in every business, one of the things that I'll do is I'll do like a cross-department collaboration, meaning let's say that one of our KPIs is down or we're just kind of in a slump. A lot of times you need different perspectives, meaning if you're running a team and you're running a team of customer service, you know what? What's wrong with having the sales team or another team listening to phone calls, giving them that advice, right? Or other perspectives on it, a male perspective, a female perspective, a young perspective, an older perspective. So what I'll usually do is whenever a team's in a slump, I kind of call an audible. And then what I do is I say, okay, if I know this KPI or this part's in a slump, what I'll usually do is I'll pull them in a room and say, what you're going to do is you're going to teach a course for 30 minutes to other team members on different teams, which, number one, gives them the ability and accountability that they own the problem, right? If I go in there and say, here's the problem, what does everyone think? That's not anything. What it is, Dustin, we have a problem. Take 30 minutes and do a presentation to these other team members on what the problem is and explain the problem. So then it's ownership. They own it. And then it'll allow other people to collaborate on their problem. Because sometimes when you're in departments or you have a small company, you kind of just get stuck with the people around you. And that happens organically. It just happens naturally. So it's either, if you're coming from a bigger company, pull in from other departments, have the person that has the problem do the presentation, give them ownership of the problem and the solution in fixing the problem. And if you're in a small startup and there's only 3 of you, find a friend, find another entrepreneur, find another person in your network that could actually come in and say, hey, we're going to have this lunch. I want to do a 40-minute, 30-minute presentation on this problem, and I'd love to get your feedback. Do you mind if I buy you lunch and just help us out? And then pull people in. I think it's really, really important to get other people's advice in different perspective, because there's a lot of things that I've done, to be honest with you, that I just really went into it saying, I'm going to let them fail. And it worked. We buy radio. One of my radio buyers was like, I would like to test doing SMS off of a radio ad, right? And I'm thinking to myself, okay, I will allow this idea to fail. I'll be nice and allow it to fail.
Right.
Kick butt. And that is the learning lesson for me, right? Not only is it a learning lesson for a team, but I have to take a step back and say, why did this work?
Yeah.
Why did I have that limited mindset? Why did I not think it was going to work? And then you have to try to teach yourself why, even though having a team is beautiful because it allows you to think to yourself, what's going to work, what's not going to work. But then if you allow your team to do it, allow your team to fail, you're proven wrong all the time. And it allows you to become real human really quick. Right. You know what I mean? Because your team's going to teach you more than you could probably teach yourself. It's crazy.
Geoff, I could speak to you all day and go further. I want to make sure we get in a little mini WealthFit round. I'm going to abbreviate this. I hope you're having as much fun as I am and everyone listening in. All right, so WealthFit round, rapid fire. What's been your most worthwhile investment?
I would say my most worthwhile investment is a lot of the passive income stuff that I've done. Investing in properties, investing in funds. A lot of time, see the stock market go up and down, right? And people's emotions go up and down. But I kind of like those steady income opportunities. Those definitely have been my best investments altogether. And a lot of people are like, well, are you afraid that real estate's going to go up and down? The only thing I know is I know how much cash I have out, and I know how much my rental is, and I know that return on investment. If the properties go up 10%, down 10%, sideways, it's all about the return on the money, and I'm kind of just thinking about money differently. Those have by far been my best investments, and that's because I was surrounded with the right people that educated me on that.
What's that investment you don't want to talk about?
The investment I don't want to talk about is when I had my mortgage company, there was Greenwich, Connecticut, very affluent area. I wanted to be in a real estate office in Greenwich, Connecticut. So I kind of bought my way in, meaning I knew somebody that wanted to start a brokerage. So I funded the brokerage with the agreement that I could put a seat in the office and that it was going to pay multiple times over because I was in an office in a real estate company that will be doing multi-million dollar investments. But unfortunately, the real estate company did not pan out the way I thought it would. And my return on investment did not pan out the way I thought it was going to.
Fair enough. When you're not making investments like that and life is actually good and cash flowing, what's your guilty spending splurge?
My guilty pleasure splurge lately has been I'm putting a pool at the house. And the reason why is because I want to be the house where my kids' friends want to hang out in, just to kind of have control of the situation. I don't want somebody to have a pool at their house and then my kids not want to hang out. Like I said, one of our bucket lists is to go to as many national parks as we can. I want to see every national park before I die. That is like our bucket list. So besides the pool, it's traveling around and seeing national parks.
How many more, roughly?
Oh, I have like almost 25 more to go.
Wow. How many have you done?
We've done about
roughly
around 15.
Okay.
Yeah. So
interesting. I'm curious your routine. So to make you at the top of your game, you're obviously running big teams, you're managing big ad spends, you've got kids. What are your routines or rituals to get Geoff performing at the highest levels?
For me, one of the things is being present for me. I'm very one-dimensional, meaning like I love to walk in to my office, clean the whiteboard every single morning, and write down what I have to do. And, running multiple teams, those things change all the time. They really do. And then what I'll always ask myself is what has the biggest impact on the bottom line? And working on that and making that a priority. A lot of people get caught up in projects that really have no impact. They spend a lot of time. We do a lot of coaching with real estate investors, and I'll meet people at a seminar or something like that. I'm like, hey, how's the business? What have you been doing the last 3 months? It's like, I've been working like crazy to get my website up and going. It's like you make money in real estate when you're putting offers on real estate, right? So it's like making sure that there's reality checks to what makes money, what doesn't make money, what's a mover of the whole business. I think that's really important. Then another ritual at night is every night I try to walk with one of my kids, meaning leave my phone behind, go for a walk. We take the same walking route every single night, and being able to ask questions. I probably asked less questions when I was younger. And the more as I get older, I ask more questions. I think, and you'll see this with teenagers and people in college, they don't ask questions, right? They don't. And what happens is then they start making mistakes. They wonder why they make mistakes. So just being curious, right? Being curious in my kids' life, asking questions, trying to figure out how their brain works. And I think that's what really gets me motivated, just kind of doing the same thing, just disconnecting.
Interesting. Geoff, it's been amazing. Like I said, I could keep going and going and going. And I really appreciate you being on the show. For folks that want to keep tabs with your ventures or what you're up to in the world, how can they best do that?
I would say that you should get into WealthFit. One of the things that we talked about was, you remember the growth of my mortgage company, the guilt I felt from hiring people. When that happened, I actually really, really spent a lot of time on outsourcing. And it was kind of my therapy per se, not to hire a huge team. At first, I would start just outsourcing because there was like this emotional disconnect, but I've gotten really, really good at it. If you want to follow me, you should check out definitely the outsourcing course that I did inside of WealthFit. And I just look forward to adding more and more content there.
Awesome. Thanks, Geoff.
I appreciate it.
I don't even know where to start. So many takeaways, so many takeaways. I want to bring this to your awareness because there was a lot of things covered and there's a lot of nuggets in here. These are the ones that called to me. You should see my notes in front of me, over 2 pages of notes. And I hope you enjoyed that show. That definitely was one of our meatier ones. And it is rightly so packed with nuggets of wisdom. So I want to call out a couple to remind you of all the goodness in the show. Number one is self-awareness. I think more and more this calls to me as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, as someone that just, wants to conquer the world, right? Wants to have more fun. And it's understanding that self-awareness. And I think you've got to understand, you've got to check in with people. And Geoff talks about that, is he's fortunate to have that gift. And from what I understand, not everyone has this, but I think you can work on this and get better. So self-awareness, big time, understanding that. And you heard it early on when we started with Geoff's first thing back in the dot-com bubble and then the crash is, people spending, I wrote down stupid money. And what I mean by that is people getting investments from VCs and just doing crazy things and not really focusing on the bigger picture and actually bringing in revenue. That was a big, big lesson for me is, just because you get funding, just because you get money, you still want to be wise with it, right? It's not a free for all. And it's what I appreciate about this environment around here at WealthFit. I see a lot of the crew at FortuneBuilders, and they have that mindset. And so they're a rather large company, and yet they still think like, a one-man show where it's like you're looking at every penny, you're looking at every dollar. And I'm not saying like that's the way to do everything in life, and most certainly they don't do that. However, I thought that was incredibly powerful. So no matter how successful, it's important to stay true to who you are and keep your eye on the ball. I loved, and it really spoke to me, I think you could tell in the show, sometimes us as entrepreneurs or investors, we get in our own head. Sometimes you don't have the ability to get together in a group or chat with other folks and share your struggles. You can't share it with your vendors because if your business is down or even if it's up, like your vendors and the people that provide services to you, they may get the idea, ooh, I should bail, or, maybe I should charge more, right? And sometimes your family doesn't get it because they don't have that same gene, especially if you're an entrepreneur, and it's hard for them to relate and get good advice. And so surrounding yourself with people, incredibly powerful, being able to bounce ideas off of and paying it forward, very, very good. Man, so many things here. Team building. I want to talk about team building. That is something that I believe is one of Geoff's gifts. Yes, he's a world-class marketer and tech guy, but also like I've seen him in action and he's incredible. And so the big takeaway from the show is, listen, as you start to grow your business, you've got to empower others and you've got to let them fail. You might know, right, in your head, but you've got to let them fail. Now, in Geoff's case, he's known a couple times, I'm sure, but also he's been pleasantly surprised. He's been wrong. And listen, as the leader of a business, as a leader of a department, we're not necessarily supposed to have all the answers. The better thing to do is to surround yourself with people that make you uncomfortable and then let them fail and you be pleasantly surprised. Let them figure it out, because if you're just building a one-man empire, a one-woman empire where everything flows back to you, you're only going to grow so big. And so you've got to empower your team to do so. And I love the strategy of having them present. You learn more when you teach, and Geoff is spot on about that, is having to teach it versus passively just learning it and doing it every day. Teaching it takes it up to a whole level. So if you want to keep those rock stars around in your life, make sure to include them, make sure that they're teaching, make sure that you're giving them opportunities to go out there and fail, essentially. Now, obviously, you don't want to be dictating a culture of failure, but you do want to give people that space to go out there and experiment. Another big takeaway, and I might have a few more for you. Another big takeaway, put a time frame on it. Man, this is something I wish I had done in my previous venture, was understand that I need to check in with myself. I need to, as Geoff says, look at my happiness. Am I growing? Am I happy here? And sometimes, as you guys know, if you're just learning for the first time, just because you create it doesn't mean you can't leave. And that was my story, is I created it and I didn't think I could leave. And so with a time frame, as Geoff recommends here, is incredibly, incredibly powerful. And I do want to give attribution to Mr. Wonderful, because Geoff got it from Mr. Wonderful. That's my note here. And so have a goal for your money, have a goal or time frame for your career or projects that you're in, so that you can check in and understand where you are on your path. I think that's one of the big nuggets out of the show, big time. Final takeaway among so many is being present. So I really enjoyed Geoff's thoughts about taking his kids, or his actions, actually, his commentary on taking his kids and going for a walk, because, you know, in this day and age of electronics, in this day and age of it moving so quickly, and it's just so easy to kind of sit around, watch the TV if that's your thing, or get caught up in your biz. And so taking that moment to step away from all that and going on a walk with your kids. My boys are young, and I'm excited to be doing this with them shortly, just to check in and just kick it old school is what I'm thinking, and just really figure out how they learn. And that's something I truly appreciate about Geoff, is he understands how to apply a lot of the stuff in business and take it home and do the same thing. And so it's the same thing. You could take your team member for a walk and figure out, you know, have a conversation. How do they think? And ask them questions. And all tag teaming along with that. I'm sliding in another takeaway here, is the ability of asking questions. And so when you're young, oftentimes we don't ask enough questions. And as Geoff pointed out, later in life, you know, the more questions you ask and you actually stop talking and just ask more questions and let the other people do the talking, it's very telling, and you can learn a lot about people, how they respond, and their nature. And so I thought that was powerful from the family perspective. And I was really touched, moved, and inspired by his wife having his back and having a partner like that. I think that's incredible. And I think that's something that we should all strive to be for our partners, for our spouses when they're down, or when maybe you see they don't have that confidence, or they've lost the swagger, or however you can relate to that. I think it's important to be there for them and give them and share your experiences in belief in what they're doing, and just be that sounding board for them. And that definitely moved me. And so super curious. This, like I said, was a meaty show. I want to know, what are your takeaways? Let us know on the social. What are your takeaways? What really called to you? And more importantly, what are you going to do about it? Like, what are your action items? Are you going to go and put together a little mastermind with other entrepreneurs to bounce ideas off of? Are you going to operate your team in a different way? Give them a little bit more on the leash for those of you that feel like you're doing all of the decisions and having to manage everybody and having them come and report to you. What are the action items you are going to act on from this show? I want to know. I want to engage with you. Let me know. I'm very curious. And I hope you had as much fun as I did. Man, I can't wait to see you on the next show. Thanks for listening to this episode of Get WealthFit. Did you have an aha moment or two during the episode? I want to know. Remember, life doesn't pay you for what you know. It pays you for what you do, for the actions you take and the moves you make. So take a second right now and go to getwealthfit.com. You'll find a printable recap of this episode, links to things we mentioned in the show, and some exercises that'll help you start taking action on the things you've learned. You can also get in touch with me, Dustin Matthews. That's getwealthfit.com. Go there now, and I can't wait to talk with you again on the next episode.